Please note that listeners may find some of this content in this episode upsetting or distressing. If you would like to access support relating to the topic discussed, please get in touch with our team. All of our contact details can be found at www.healthwatchessex.org.uk.
Welcome to Hidden Voices, the podcast series which explores the less heard voices in health and social care. I'm Sharon and I work for Healthwatch Essex. It's our job to make sure that people's experiences help to improve health and social care services. You may have seen recently in the news the scandal involving the mother and baby institutions in Ireland. And today I'm joined by Jeff, whose family has a very personal experience of those. Jeff, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. Would you like to tell us where this story starts for your family?
Well, there's probably no greater group of people at keeping secrets than the Irish, and that's certainly true of my family. You have a made up or a completely denied existence or story. I'd lived with my grandmother until I was 13. I think there was probably a jump on point at about 7 or 8 when I realised that actually she wasn't my grandmother, but what that actually meant in terms of the familial relationships that we had. So although I never thought of my aunts and uncles and my mother as brothers and sisters, there wasn't quite a connect and a fit there, and I never really fit with the family. I was an addition to it. It was a bizarre thing. At some point at 13, I came to England to live with my mother, who had been gone for quite some time at that point. And gradually over the years, snippets of things came out. I think at 25, I'd returned home for a funeral. My mother had just had an operation and couldn't go. And it was there at a funeral that I'd overheard a conversation about, he's the one that they kept. Mm-hmm. And from there, it became a little bit of a tricky story. And I remember having a conversation with my grandmother that night, and she just wouldn't talk about it. She wouldn't talk about it at all. And it impacted me to the point that I never set foot in Ireland again while she was alive, which was a very difficult thing. We then get to COVID, and I was very, very ill. My mother started a conversation with me on a FaceTime, which has sort of changed my entire outlook about every aspect of my life and obviously every aspect of hers.
When you say you were very ill, you were literally at the point where you could possibly have died.
Yeah, I was one of the ones that was very sick with COVID, and obviously I live here. I have no family in this country. They're all in Ireland. We were in a variety of levels of lockdown between the two different administrations. So there was no going home, there was no spending time, and all we had was FaceTime and a variety of things like that. But I think from what I picked up at that funeral when I was 25, I always knew that there would be a conversation at some point. I had imagined it would be a deathbed conversation, but I didn't imagine for 1 second that might be potentially my own deathbed.
You thought it would be your mum's?
Yeah. But, moving forward, I'm better, and in the last 4 or so years, we've found every day is a school day, and we find out another new, gruesome, horrendous detail each and every day.
What did your mum disclose to you in that first conversation?
Well, horrifying tale of abuse, and details have spilled out over the last few years. Even more detail, more meat on the bone, as it were. My mother had taken part in a secret documentary, and she'd given evidence of some of the abuse in part of an investigatory inquiry into the Northern Ireland mother and baby homes. It's largely thought that this is a Catholic problem, and it really isn't. We're a Protestant family, and my mother was put in a Protestant mother and baby home in Belfast. To give you a bit of an idea of what that looked like, she come from a very remote area. Dromore is a very small town, not very dissimilar to Earlscombe, very, very small little high street. And they were about a mile outside of that, up a hill, up a dirt road with no electric, no real water. Water had to be dragged from a well, and that was that. And she was taken from there, a very scared, very frightened 14-year-old pregnant child, and dropped straight into an area in Belfast that was called at the time the Interchange, and that was a sort of a buffer zone between one pocket of trouble and another pocket of trouble, at probably the most volatile time in Belfast political terrorist history. Certainly in March and April of 1972, when I was born, that was probably the biggest bombing campaign in Northern Ireland's history.
An awful lot for a very young girl to be
An
dealing with
incredibly difficult world. They took her out of a very rural, very country environment where there weren't a lot of people to a very overpopulated place where there wasn't an inch of peace to be had at the time. Add to that she'd had years of abuse at the hands of a stepfather and then raped by another person, and she's terrified for her own health. What will happen to her? Where will she go? What will happen to her siblings? There was always a great sense of that she was worried about protecting them, but actually what she needed to do was get herself out. But you know what you know when you know it.
And that's a natural thing, isn't it, for older siblings to protect the younger ones?
Over the course of the following few years, we've developed a more easy nature with this conversation, and we're able to talk about these things and approach it in a different way. One of the challenges that she said to me was, if you've known about some of this since you were 25, why did you not speak to me about it? And we had a difficult relationship because obviously, in terms of the mother and baby units, I would be what they might describe as an adoptee, even though I never left the family, technically. I wasn't fostered, I wasn't adopted, but I do have some of those same identity aspects that adoptees do have. Why didn't my mother want me? Why did she just leave the country? You know, those aspects that are very common with families like ours.
Did your mum tell you very much about what life was like in the mother and baby institution?
Eventually, it was one of those aspects where she needed to cover the headlines, and then she'd add the story in the paragraphs of the detail later on. And we've been doing that now maybe for the last 4 or 5 years. It was a peculiar situation for her. Obviously, she's a child herself. She's still in school. She's 14 years old. She's moved into a children's home in Omagh, and then eventually 3 months later at 15, transferred to Belfast to a mother and baby home, where she's in a room with other girls from very, very different backgrounds. And some of those girls were people who had been given a choice. It's you're pregnant and it's here or prison. People who had broken the law, people who were drinking, people who were doing all sorts of things. And this wasn't one of those girls. She was a 14-year-old girl that was abused. So that wasn't her experience. It was also a religious organisation, so there was a very different aspect again. She describes it as being paraded on Sunday down to the Citadel and taking the knee and asking for forgiveness for her sins, for her shame and her wrongdoing, even though she was 15, the victim of this. And so it was a very, very different experience. She, lived it with the exception of this horrendous abuse. Her time was filled with running in fields and playing in a world of make-believe. A child that's not exposed to much of the world, but exposed to horrors of the world that shouldn't be inflicted on anyone. And then suddenly she's in a virtual war zone in spring of 1972, heavily pregnant, up scrubbing floors and pots and pans, and
it wasn't a restful life, was it? It was
so
hard
it was
labour.
classed as a mother and baby home, but it was in every way a workhouse, like many others. I'd found through researching this a variety of forums, and there's a forum where they talk about these mother and baby homes. It's based in Northern Ireland, and I remember this word jumped off the screen, and it was a name. It was my mother's name, and I thought, who the hell are they talking about? And I gradually read through that, and I was a little taken aback by the fact that they'd used this name, and I thought they were talking about my mum. And then I'd spoken to mum about, was there another lady there with the same name? And she said there was. And I said, well, what was the issue with her? Because everybody's talking about this lady. And this lady had been there more than 50 years in that same place. She was in her late 60s. They all described her as slow or backwards or special needs or whatever. And she was a skivvy. She was a dog's body, and they would beat her and slap her in the head and take the mick out of her and push her and run her into the ground. And this woman had entered there. She had entered there pregnant, probably abused herself, and had had a child who, I think at 50, had come to look for her and found her. So she did meet her son, but what a horrible, horrible life. So therefore, that's sort of typical.
Somebody so vulnerable that was just exploited.
And just exploited. And you know, you look at what human slavery definitions are, that meets so many of those criteria. But that's typical for so many girls. There's a lot of thought that this is a Catholic problem, and it really isn't. But the experiences in various different places are quite unique.
And then your mum had the baby?
My mum had me, bearing in mind that my mother is 15 and not what I would call developed. If you see a picture of my mother at 17, she looks more like a girl of 13 or 14. Mm-hmm. And she has a great big walloping lump like me at 8 pound 8 ounces. And that's that. And everything sort of rolls on, and she gets up and potters about and does a few bits a few days after I'm born, and seems to get into a rhythm and a routine. And then fell prey to a member of staff who should have been there to help and to support, but instead of that groomed her, and she ended up pregnant again. So
she didn't leave the Mother and Baby Institution.
Well,
she got pregnant by a member of staff whilst nursing a young baby.
Yeah, a male member of staff got her pregnant 3 months after she had me.
So she's still 15 at this point, still
just 15.
Underage.
No, not quite. She's 16 at this point. December of 72, she's admitted to hospital because she keeps fainting.
And she's still been in the Mother and Baby Institution all that time?
She's been in the Mother and Baby home that time. So she's been there a year at this point.
And that's where you're growing up?
And I've been there 8 months by this point. And she keeps fainting and falling over, and they take her to hospital. She's very anemic, and they take her to hospital. And from there, decide that they're going to move her on because she's pregnant. And that's their discharge papers. Pregnant again.
Moved her on from a Mother and Baby unit to being pregnant.
Yeah, moved her on from a Mother and Baby home to a more suitable environment, another 30 miles beyond that, out to the coast, where she had to go again. But of course, by this point, she'd spent 10 days in hospital, very unwell. I remained in the home at this point, and then a decision was made that I was going to go to a children's home in Omagh, 60 odd miles in one direction, and she was going to go to another Mother and Baby unit in the opposite direction, and that's where we ended up. So then in August of 73, she gave birth to a baby girl.
Who was caring for you in that period?
I was in a children's home.
So you'd just been cared for there the whole time?
Yeah.
Not by family or?
No.
Okay.
No, just a children's home. In Omagh, which oddly enough I grew up around. It's literally over the hedge from my family at that point. I'm not sure at what point they moved on to that little estate on the edge of the town, but Mum had the other baby in August of 73, and then from there her and the baby was moved to the same children's home as me.
Huge thing for your mum, another new baby and being reunited.
Yeah, so not 17, and she's got 2 children. But she was so damaged by her childhood and so broken by her upbringing and the abuse that she'd suffered that she made the conscious decision in her 16-year-old brain that she would give up the daughter for adoption to keep her safe, because she alone knew the risks of being a stepdaughter. She imagined, I think, in her head, imagined very much that her daughter would face the same future.
And that's crucial to understand, isn't it? Because people might say, how could you choose? How could you do that? But she knew all too well the risks of trying to protect a female.
Yeah. She knew what it was like to be a stepdaughter. She knew what it was like to be somebody else's shame. Mm. And she knew how vulnerable in the type of country that we lived in, that would make her. And it was a difficult ask, and a difficult thing for her to do, but not probably an easy thing for her daughter to maybe read in a letter. That I gave you up, I wanted to keep you safe. That she chose to. You see all of these long lost family shows, and it's, oh, I never wanted to give you up. Mum didn't want to give her up, but she felt she had no choice but to give her up, because she knew the consequences of life as a stepdaughter. She'd lived a very real, very, very painful existence.
So how did that process take place, that giving up of her daughter?
Well, the child stayed in a home. But again, these are things that you know when you know, and you know the level of detail. There's a picture I have of me sat on the Derry Road in Omagh on a little wall, and it's quite an odd picture, but I've always liked it because it's a picture that I've always described it as, there's always somebody worse off than yourself. So there's me on the wall, and next to me is a kid that's 4 months younger than me. He lives few streets up from me, a few houses up from me, and he is the 10th child of the family. And his father died at 39 of a massive heart attack, and they didn't have much. We didn't have much, but they didn't have anything. They were very, very, very poor. And in the background of this picture is a children's home. So as little as we had, they had nothing. They didn't even have family. What I didn't realise until very much later is that probably at the time that photo was taken, first of all, I didn't realise I'd been in that home myself. Secondly, I didn't realise that at the time that picture was taken, my sister was probably still in it, because she wasn't adopted until 1975, so she was a toddler.
So effectively, that's the only photograph of you and your sister together?
Me in a brick building.
Yeah.
Me in a brick building. So it is a peculiar thing. You know what you know when you know it.
So your sister was left in the institution, and you and your mum, what happened to you?
Like a lot of Irish girls, and she was a girl still, like a lot of Irish girls, they were told to buck their ideas up, and there'll be other babies, you'll go and get yourself a husband. And that's how she ended up in Essex. She married an Essex boy that was a squaddy in Omagh in the 1970s, the very early 70s, and off she went. And it was whatever agreed that I was going to live with my grandmother. So I lived with her from probably 18 months old, so from about September of 73. So
your mum meeting this other gentleman was quite quick?
A little bit later. She had, to go on off and do this or go and get a fresh start. And I remember her and a friend of hers come. Frightening, you wouldn't let a child that age do it now, but they left Ireland, come to London, and were living in hotels in Earl's Court, doing silver service waitressing for this hotel. And you think, these are two children.
That would be a lot of red flags now.
It would be a considerable amount of red flags. You wouldn't do it. You just wouldn't do it. And it's just insane to think that you would send a 17-year-old girl to the middle of the British capital to work and to live. And we weren't on the phone. It was, you'd write to people. That would be it. There was no, I need to ring home in an emergency. There was no ringing.
And there was no scope, presumably, for you and your mum to maintain any kind of relationship.
No, not at all. But that's not to say that she wasn't a conscientious mother, but with a very, very different role to play in that family sort of setup. And the longer I was there, the less control she had, and the more, I think, frustrated she would be. It impacts relationships as well, this kind of a history, this kind of hidden history, because you have secrets, and it's how much does a person need to know? How much do I want to tell? How much can I tell them? I'd never broached the subject with her because I didn't know where she would be on a mental health scale of what would her reaction be to that secret being known. That was her secret to tell. Even though I knew it, it was her secret to tell. And
somehow verbalising it makes it more dangerous, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it makes her. I didn't know how she would be. Lots of people have done terrible things to themselves through grief and through stress and through
Of course.
And the other aspect is, has she locked this away? But is there even a memory of this? Does this need to be brought out carefully in a managed way? Or are we then going to ruin the future, the last chapter of her life, just like the first chapter of her life was taken from her?
So you were growing up in Ireland, effectively without her?
Yes. It was a very, very strange thing. So I had aunts and uncles that weren't much older than me, by all accounts. Probably the youngest one was 8 years older than me. So as they were leaving school, I was going into it as, that sort of thing. That caused problems because somebody had been for 8 years used to being the baby of the family, and now suddenly there's a literal baby in the house. So there was always that kind of an aspect. And there's that identity of belonging because you're not part of that family unit. You're just a bolt-on, and there was that aspect to it as well. So growing up in Northern Ireland, it was home to me. We were poor. We weren't any better off just because we were in a 3-bedroom house on an estate rather than the shack they lived in on the mountain. But we were poor. You don't know that you're poor until somebody tells you later on, because that's just your existence. That's your normal.
But you instinctively always felt detached somehow, it sounds.
Well, I didn't belong. I had a grandmother that wasn't my grandmother, but I called her a grandmother that was my grandmother, but I called her Mammy. And I called her Mammy until I was 13.
Okay.
And coming to England, and then suddenly Caroline's not Caroline anymore, she is Mum, and actually that felt a normal transition. Mm-hmm. But Mammy never become Granny, ever. But she didn't stay Mammy either, so just called her by her first name the rest of her life.
So you came over to England?
Yeah. And
reconnected with your mum?
She came to Ireland and wasn't happy with how I was being brought up.
Right, okay.
That's simply the truth of it. It was her family too, and she would come often, and she would work diligently here, and 1 and 2 jobs at a time just to make money and to try and keep a roof over her head here. Her marriage had broken up very, very early on, and she worked very, very, very hard. And I remember on my 10th birthday, she had decided she was going to bring her mother and me for a holiday. And I remember it was my 10th birthday because I was obsessed with the fact that I'd never seen a flat before. I'd never been in a flat in my life. We were all bungalow people in Ireland. We were up these little stairs, and the Falklands War broke out the day before my 10th birthday. Okay. And I remember watching this morose-looking man, this John Knott, announcing the war, and we were walking around this big, fantastic, beautiful town of Basildon where everything was nice and shiny and new and intentional and created with a design in mind, and the town centre was pedestrianised. You didn't have a tractor and trailer going up the middle of it on a Saturday morning.
And your love of Basildon was born.
Yeah, kind of a little bit created. It was a peculiar thing. It was just a totally alien world to me. We'd never been out of Omagh before, really. Not since I'd gone to live with my grandmother. So that happened. But there was a lot of jealousy there, that this younger uncle that's only a few years older than me, absolutely raging that I was going to England and he wasn't. But of course,
it's your mum.
It's just familial stuff. And from there, that was 1982, and 3 years later, she said, "That's it. You're coming to live in England." And then the battle royale really, really took shape, because obviously by this point her siblings were older and they knew what a victim she could be, and they knew that if I went, they'd be stuck with her. And that was the thing. Everything in the world was about her. She was a bit of a narcissist in that way, that my grandmother would whole conversations would suddenly be her problem. Nobody knows how I've suffered. There would be comments, throwaway comments. People would come into the house and they would talk about, "Jesus, you're a marvel, taking on somebody else's child when you've raised 6 of your own. Aren't you wonderful?" She'd never push back and say, any of that. I remember once Mum came to my primary school to pick me up. I was probably about 7 or 8. And I remember overhearing one of the teachers saying to one of the others that she gave her mother trouble. And just these things lodge in your head, and then there's a point where you understand what that means. And what's always angered me and annoyed me is that at no point did either her own mother or anyone anywhere say, she's not a bad girl. She wasn't out tramping the streets. She didn't do anything wrong. This was done to her. Nobody to fight her corner, nobody to stand up for her and say, she's not who you think she is. She's a victim of this.
As a growing young man, that naturally makes you feel angry.
It does, absolutely. As a middle-aged man, it makes me raging.
You were younger back then.
Yeah. It's just the way it is. It is just how those things are. And that's the thing. It isn't, if it was never talked about at all, but it is talked about. It's whispered in rooms that you're
It's not hidden, it's insinuated.
It's insinuated, and they do talk about it. And I remember that time where Mum put her foot down and she said, he's coming to England and he's living with me. He's my son. You don't have custody. He's coming to me. And that's it. Because I'm not happy. He's either going to be 10 years from now, he's either going to be in prison or he's going to be dead. I'm not having it. And obviously we were in the throes of quite a lot of terrorism in Northern Ireland at the time. And it is kids like me on poor estates that would be drawn into that sense of belonging, that gangs, we have it here with gang culture, you have it everywhere. And gang culture, whether that be Northern Ireland in the 70s or Hackney now, the principle's the same.
Absolutely.
People want to belong, they want to be part of something, validate their existence. So she said, I'm not having it, he's coming to England, and that was that. And it was almost like a war. She was the worst in the world. She was terrible. How could you do this? How could you do that? And she just had to do what she'd always done, which is just stick her chin out and say, screw this. This is what's happening.
But bring you to Basildon she did.
But bring me to Basildon she did. And that was a terrible, terrible experience. I remember we went via Leicester, not a particularly direct route, but her sister lived in Leicester. So we went to Leicester for a week and stayed there, and I arrived in Basildon on the 28th of August 1985 to a new world, a totally new world, which on reflection Basildon was a salvation for both of us, because it was out of a situation and out of a family that was just wrong on so many levels, and not necessarily on our own side, if that makes sense.
But you hadn't actually lived with your mum for a long time, so I would imagine...
I hadn't lived with my mum since I was 8 months old.
That can't have been easy in itself?
No, not at all. Relationships, family relationships are very, very difficult, very incredibly difficult. I am now and have always been a bit of a reflector, so I will watch things and I'll take information in. And I might give you a remark about it now, but it'll be later on that I'll sit and I'll have thought about it and I'll have, looked at it from loads of different angles. And I had a bad relationship with my mum. I didn't understand. As a child, I didn't understand why is she living in England? Why am I living here? Why is she not here? Why doesn't she want me? That adoptee kind of syndrome.
Do you think it would be fair to say there was some resentment?
A lot of resentment. We had a very difficult relationship. Temperament-wise, we're both very similar, so we're both quite flighty, both of us. We look similar. We are similar in our temperaments, and so we'd bash off each other. That mental banging heads kind of aspect. I didn't want to be ruled. She didn't want to be ignored, and that kind of aspect. And I didn't bring you up to. Yeah, you're bloody right. You didn't bring me up. I was brought up and and that really nonsense stuff that doesn't really matter at all. Normal stuff. But the stuff that really doesn't matter, where you say words that you think you're being clever, but actually what you're doing is you're being hurtful. You're being just horrible. And that probably continued. That probably continued in one way or another until that funeral when I was 25 and I went home and I had a completely different take. I didn't know the answer, but I knew the headline, that there was more to this than that. And maybe she's that way because of something else. But I was never brave enough to ask the question, because I was never brave enough to find out the truth. And the other aspect was I didn't know how she would be about that. So it did take another 25 years.
I don't think that's uncommon though in people in this situation. There's that fear of saying, I know that something has happened, tell me what it is.
Yeah.
It's the unknown, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's exactly where it was. It was just that I want the answers, but I'm not entirely sure that I'm brave enough to ask the question.
But at some point, your mum actually went back to Ireland to live, didn't she?
Yeah, much, much later. So I'd been home to that funeral, I'd heard that information, and I came home with a totally new and unique understanding that there was more to Mum than I knew, and that at some point that would come out, and our relationship changed entirely for the better. And when I say for the better, I mean, we'd reopened the embassies and reinstalled our ambassadors. It was a different kind of...
treaties were signed.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just, I didn't know the whole picture, and I knew I maybe would never know the whole picture, but I couldn't judge it on what I thought, what I decided in my own head was her truth, and it wasn't at all. So we had a much better life. She was obviously married again. She married when I was 16, and I didn't feel one way or the other about her getting married. I thought, I'm not always going to be living at home. Why do I get to determine whether, So they're still together now. They're very, very happy, and they're settled into each other, and they've trained each other well and programmed each other well, and they seem to exist quite well.
The secret of a successful marriage.
Yeah, the secret of a successful marriage. Yeah. So, they're living in Ireland. So her mother died in 2013, and that set the ball rolling. She could never have gone on a voyage of discovery or a voyage of discussion while her mother lived, because her mother would never talk about it. Wouldn't at all. And that's why I never went back to Ireland, because I'd asked the question, what is this? But what do you want to be talking about that for? Why are you always bringing up the past? Why are people always living in the past? Well, because you know the answers and we don't, so that's why we're asking. You're in a position of power.
The past is relevant.
You're in a position of power. We're not. We're asking the questions. So I never set foot in the country again until her funeral. And even then it was the bare minimum. I left my house in Basildon at 4:30 in the morning, drove to the airport in the suit I would be wearing to the funeral, got on a plane, landed in Belfast, drove across the country to Fermanagh and then Tyrone, back to Belfast, and was back in my house 18 hours later. And it's a difficult thing, a difficult thing. And your perception, if you'd have asked me at 14 or 12, who is the most important person in my life, I would have said it was my mammy, my grandmother. If you'd have asked me the same question 13 years ago, when she was still alive, I would have said the same thing. Now I don't even know that I know the woman, because it isn't that she kept details, it's the level of complicit, the level of, I don't know if that's a word or not, complicity, that she had in the situation, that the country was run by such a moral, conservative high ground that you ended up with people turning a blind eye to what was going on in their own home. And how do you turn a blind eye to your own child being raped by your husband? How do you do that? I don't understand that. But she'd had 2 children out of wedlock herself. Mum was a stepdaughter. So she knew the shame of not having a husband. She knew that the shame of not having that societal respectability of having a husband. Even if he was a half-wit, he was your husband. A decent, respectable married woman. Other people joke that, oh, you're lucky your husband's dead. That gives you an exit. You're a widow. Nice and plenty of respect in being a widow, but not a divorcee. It's a very backwards, very old British kind of way, but actually still quite a valid and current way of life for Ireland and for Irish families. Shame is a big control factor.
For many families of different cultures. So fast forward, or not so fast, to COVID. You had become very poorly.
Yeah, very, very ill. I had a bilateral pulmonary embolism. So I was lost an incredible amount of weight, but live on your own, so you have to keep yourself upright and you have to manage it in the way that you do. And we'd speak on the phone regularly, and she has an iPhone and an iPad, and we do FaceTime, and she has this odd thing that it doesn't matter if I can't see her, sure, as long as I can see you, that's the main thing.
That's a natural
So invariably
parenting.
I'll get the curtain pole behind her, or the headboard, or one of the cats on the back of the sofa, occasionally the underside of a boob. You know, that's just the way it would be, and you would never know. You would never know whether you would see. But I knew I was in for a serious conversation this day, because it was set up, I think, even on a tripod on the dining table, and she was perfectly
She
centered.
set the scene.
She was sat there like Anna Ford, about to read the news, perfectly centered. She could see me, I could see her, and I knew the conversation.
The
was
time
going
had
to start.
come.
And it started off with that, how are you, and what's going on, and I just, are you all right? Where are you? Are you sitting in the dining room? Because I don't recognise this, I don't recognise the lack of a
Have you
headboard.
got a drink?
I don't recognise the lack of a headboard or a curtain pole. And we just started a fairly simple conversation. Did you know that you had a sister? Yes, I did. How did you know?
That must have been a huge thing for her to say.
It was an enormous thing for her to say, and I took it at her pace, and we've been taking it at her pace since, because simply taking the lid off doesn't empty the contents, and that's it. Sometimes you kind of hold it over the top, but it's not quite fixed. And it's a peculiar thing, and obviously the role that I have, and I see a lot of people with mental health crises, and a lot of the work that goes into helping people in trauma, you have to take it at her pace, because it is her story. Although it involves me, mine's a slightly separate story. Hers has to be at her pace and the way that works for her, because she may or may not, I don't know, I think across the course of the last 4 years, certain things have come out that have sort of triggered her. She's done a lot of conversations with a variety of counsellors and things like that, and that's been really helpful. And there's some really fantastic support groups in Northern Ireland. There's a group called the Birth Mothers and Their Children for Justice, and these are just two women similar to Mum. One's a mother, one's a child, but they're coming at it from a different angle. But the work and the support that they've put into it is incredible. But for Mum, it started off with that aspect of counselling, and it helped her talk about it, and it helped her rationalise her relationships with other people. As I said, you know, if you'd have asked me when I was 13 who the most important person, it would have been Mammy. If you'd asked me now, she doesn't even come into it, because I don't know who that was at all. But now everything is about how do we get Mum to a point where that's it, she can enjoy her retirement and just move on to a point where she's comfortable with it and she's not haunted by her own life anymore. And I think that's a difficult ask for her, because there is so much that there aren't answers to. We have the issue of Northern Ireland is literally little more than 100 years old. So when your origin is 6 counties about the size of Essex, records are very hard to find and access. We know also that some of these organisations were deliberately obtuse and not only got rid of records, but kept incomplete or inaccurate records as well. Finding records, getting details, getting just that thread to pull can be very difficult. So, for example, I've known who my father was, but finding details on him was very difficult. And I've managed to gradually get enough of a thread so I can get a record of him. And while people say, well, why do you want to know that? Well, actually, there may be a health aspect. There may be, some hereditary health aspect that it would be bloody helpful to know.
I think most people would understand that there is that need to know where you come from. However much you may not like that existing, it is inherent in most of us.
I mean, I've stood on the man's grave and I don't feel anything one way or the other, positive, negative or anything. It is a fact of life. This is a person that raped my mother. And this is a person who carried on to have a life. with that knowledge in his head all the time.
And for your mum, there's never been any justice, and there won't,
No.
presumably, that, that sexual violence was committed against her.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's something that she's had to carry throughout her life.
Yeah.
And of course, the lack in her life of one of her children.
Yeah, and that's a difficult thing as well. So obviously adoptions have to be handled because both sides have a right to privacy and both sides have a right to protection. So that's handled usually through an intermediary through social services, and that was done. So we know that we found her.
And there was a desire in you to know, presumably, who your sister was.
Kind of, because some of this had happened before I knew about this. So she'd been doing all of this, and I know that the social services knew who she was and where she was. But that was then a matter for Mum to sort that out.
Mm-hmm.
And Mum said, oh, well, I've written to your sister, and I've said to Mum, can you not, that might be how you want to think of it, but can you not, at this moment in time, she's another person in the world that was born. Mm. I don't feel any familial connection to her at all. I haven't met her, might never meet her. She might not want to meet us. So can we not put labels on people and just call her by her name and keep it at that? And actually, I think that's maybe insulated us a little bit. There was some back and forwards. I think she wrote to her and explained herself. Whether that felt adequate for a daughter or not, I don't know. But her daughter wrote the politest, yeah but no but kind of thanks but no thanks letter. And Mum can at least settle into the fact that she had a good life. She had a good life with decent people that she cared for, and they cared for her, and that's, I think, pretty much a success for Mum in that regard. But even that, this child lived over the hedge to us, literally over the hedge to where we were. That picture I'm talking about, we were 3. I hadn't walked 15 miles, that was down the street. And that children's home was over the hedge, and at that time my sister would have been in there.
It's hard when you think back and you know how closely lives have run parallel. So much of us would like to reach back and change things, but obviously we can't do that.
And while I absolutely believe that Mum won't have seen her, because they won't have maybe let her, I do believe to a degree that my grandmother in some ways knew more than she was telling about that adoption, who that was. On that night of the funeral, when I'd asked those questions, she had given away a couple of details and then sort of backtracked with, oh, well, no, I'm not really sure. And I remember mentioning this to Mum when we spoke about it, and she went, did she really know? She knew, didn't she? She knew everything. But this was conversations that she'd have had with her sisters, Mum's aunts, but you would always be on the outside of that, and from a period of children should be seen and not heard, that kind of attitude. It's nothing to do with you, even though it's about you, it's nothing to do with you.
That's one of the hardest things in this story, isn't it?
Yeah, none of your business.
Your mum has had so little control. Everything's been done to her.
Yeah.
But she's the central person in all of this story.
And that's the thing for me, that when you're older, you have a responsibility to settle scores and put things to bed and give people peace. And it's the fact that my grandmother went to the grave and kept these secrets because it was easier than having an awkward conversation that might in some way shed her in a bad light. And that's a terrible, terrible thing to do, because she took it with her. And any answers she knew or any shame she felt, Mum will never know. She will never in her life know whether her mother felt any shame or any sorrow or any sadness about the childhood that she'd given her. And she'd given it to her. She was a parent. We know that it's difficult to get out of domestic abuse situations. We know that. But at no point was there an explanation. At no point was there to give your own child a bit of peace, just a bit of solace that it wasn't all hell. At no point was that effort made. She went to the grave with it, and that was it, because she wasn't inconvenienced by having a conversation she didn't want. And it's difficult to accept that that's somebody's choice, that's a choice that a family member, somebody you loved, would make.
And undoubtedly this must have had a huge impact on your mum over the years as she's grown, on how she's developed as a person, her feelings, her well-being.
Yeah, and her own relationship management. Who she talks to, how she talks to people. Her low tolerance point for nonsense. I have a coaster at home and somebody bought it. This reminds me of your mother. And on the coaster it says, the flogging shall continue until morale picks up. And that's so her, in her head, and I've always said to her, we're not the Waltons, right? No matter how much you wish it, we're never going to be that nice family. We're a bit beyond that. But
there's still time.
There's still time. There's still hope. There's still hope.
But how is she now?
Yeah, she's getting there. There's a lot of stress and a lot of... Well, life goes on, with or without an inquiry and with or without a history. Life continues to chuck buckets of poo at you every day.
Certainly does.
So, she's 37 years into a marriage with a man that she's well settled with, but, they're going through his cancer journey at the moment. And of course, inquiries happen when they happen, and cancer waits for no one. So there's a lot of stress. There's a lot of stress with her life at the moment, and there's a lot of stuff that I'm quite sure she doesn't regret starting this journey and having these conversations. But I'm quite sure that it would have been easier if she hadn't. On some days, but she'll have no peace.
Sometimes things have to be done.
Yeah.
And there's very much a spotlight on, your mum's story, it's a hugely impactful one, but there are so many stories like it.
There are, across Ireland, all of Ireland. So there's two different aspects. There's the Republic of Ireland, and they held their own inquiry. In the Republic of Ireland, there was something like 56,000 women and 57,000 children that were born in mother and baby homes, Magdalen laundries and workhouses.
Staggering amount.
An enormous infant mortality rate, depending on where you are. Just last month in Tuam in County Galway, I think it is, they've just exhumed 796 children from a cesspit as part of a drainage system on the site of what was a previous mother and baby home that had become a council estate, and somebody had obviously forgot to deal with that little historic problem. And now, 65 years later, they're digging up 796 children and trying to identify them. And that's the incredible thing about this story, is that this is not, nobody's gone and brought a fantastic piece of legislation and said, let's go and help these women. These women are like mothers of children with neurodiversions. They've had to boot every damn door in to get the conversation even started, just to get the appointment, just to have a conversation. And this whole aspect with Tuam, this is just a woman looking at all of these death records in all of this place, and somebody, this woman having the sense to say, where are they? Where were they buried? And then you find them in a cesspit. It's unreal. In Bessborough, which is a Protestant home, I think that had a 75% mortality rate in 1 year.
Wow.
We were looking at 1942, statistics showed that there was something like 157 per 1,000 of illegitimate children deaths, illegitimate child deaths, compared to 74 for legitimate child deaths. If you were born in a mother and baby institution, you were 2 to 4 times more likely to lose a child in there rather than in general population. And it's just horrendous. And, you then have the aspect of, we're a very deeply religious country. We're Protestant, we're Catholic, we're very deeply religious. And the dioceses don't always necessarily follow the same boundaries as the council or the country. So if you were born somewhere in Londonderry, that diocese would go across the border. And so some of those coerced adoptions, forced adoptions, those children would be in another country with no jurisdictional demand to bring them back at all.
I think rightly many listeners at this point will be thinking, how was that allowed to happen?
How is any of it allowed to happen? But it's, it's not any different the borders in Northern Ireland, and I love it for that, but the borders in Northern Ireland with the Republic is no different from me stepping out of your front door and going into Boots across the street. It's literally, that's the Republic over there, and it is just as simple as that. It's, you know, one street in the same town is part of another nation with another government, and that's where it is. There are other mothers. These two women that have started this group, and they've been going for years, and they drive all over the country to help people and guide them through forms and paperwork. She had her child literally cut out of her, needlessly cut out of her, given a cesarean. There wasn't really any need for. And then, you know, she signed papers thinking she's signing for vaccinations, and you've signed your adoption papers, you know, and that's that. There's another lady, her mother was 21, grown woman, 21, and put into one of these places, shamed by the local priest. You've shamed your family, you've shamed the whole village, and put into one of these places, and that child was separated from her, and eventually got to live with her mother, but difficult thing. Never could keep a relationship ever again. And that's I think a typical story for a lot of people. So you have the difficulties of those cross-border aspects, you have the difficulties of, you know, in adoption, you have some of those other difficulties, especially in Northern Ireland. You know, poor Catholic girl has a child, and the child's adopted to a Protestant family that feels how it feels, and that's fine, because culturally that's they feel it's how they're brought up, or the reverse. So it's difficult. And I think you've had some organisations rather than actually say, you know, that was a difficult time in our history, you've got some organisations go, you know, it cost us money to keep these women. That's really your first approach. It cost us money to keep these women.
And now Northern Ireland are looking into the situation with the mother and baby institutions.
So in 2021 they started a Truth Recovery Design panel, and that was to look at what is there, what's the aspects that we need to look at. You know, nobody's denying that this was systemic, and it was coercive, and it was abusive, and it was in every way very wrong. And so there's an inquiry starting very recently. We've had the first and second reading in the Northern Ireland Assembly, and the first and second minister, they have met with these groups. I've been on the calls with them. They've had the first and second reading. It's now at a committee stage, and that's what they've done, is put that out to a consultation. There's 47 clauses that they want answers on, or opinions on. Does this exclude you? How do you feel about this? Is this enough? Is this too little? And I completed that yesterday, and while I'm doing mine online, I'm talking Mum through hers on paper.
And you and your mum are both being involved in this, and having your voices heard now.
But some of that, you then become a sponge, because, you know, you're trying to deal with this, and you're trying then to support her. And there's a sort of a responsibility that all of us are none of us, you know, and there are a good number of people excluded from those inquiries because they might have been in a mother and baby home, but they went to somewhere else, or their child was had somewhere. You know, there's lots and lots of different exclusions, and that was the case in the previous inquiry. The one in the Republic of Ireland, many have considered to have breached its duty towards the people it was intended to support and help. And it's sad. You've then got people like Mum who have run to England to get a life and to get a fresh start.
And again, there's many of them that did do that.
Yeah, very many of them. And I've met 4. But, you know, there's people like Mum who've come to here and can apply for this and can apply for that. The Republic of Ireland set up a redress scheme, which was that they would give them compensation for their experience, which is fine, fair enough, it is what it is. But some of those women that came here would be excluded from that because means-tested benefits or social care payments or something like that, this would count as savings, so then they wouldn't get the social care payments. So there's currently a young MP in London, Labour MP, Liam Conlon, I think his name is, and he's bringing a capital redress a capital disregard bill through Parliament to try and support, we're calling it Philomena's Law, Philomena after Philomena Lee from the film with Judi Dench, which tells the very harrowing story of a woman whose son had been taken from her, from a mother and baby home, forcibly adopted, and she, her journey desperately, years later, family of her own, to try and find her son. Of course, he had died by that point. People had lied and, lied and manipulated information and just avoided any truth telling that might have been helpful, might have given somebody 5 minutes peace in their life. But actually, it and other stories have thrown the door open to the shame of this.
And that's one of the awful things, isn't it, with this, with the passage of time and the complicated facets of it. There are some happy endings.
There are.
But equally as many not.
Yeah. I mean, I think, as I said, I'm a reflector and I look at this stuff. You process it over and over and over and over again and you read it differently. It's like you're reading the same passage, but it means something different every time you read it. And, I would be considered to be an adoptee. These groups, these forums, they consider me an adoptee because I was born in one of these places. And obviously I have a sister who was adopted. But it's a peculiar thing. I was in a family that just was just an odd family. They've all had a terrible life. They all have. But those are all individual aspects. It's not to take away from any of them. They've all had a sharp upbringing. It was a violent and abusive household.
So Jeff, what now for you and for your mum?
Onward together, I think. There's a good bit more of this inquiry journey. There'll be evidence giving. There'll be conversations, and there's hundreds and hundreds of other girls to support who didn't get that support, and you have to stand together on it.
And those women are still those vulnerable girls, aren't they?
They are. And for me, with my role here, there is just short of 12,000 people known to be Irish in Essex, which is 0.8%. And if I know 4, and both of you in this room with me know 1, imagine how many more there are out there. And the important thing, it's not about money and it's not about compensation, it's not about blame. The important thing is it's about testimony and identity and people being able to have their story told and their truth told. And it may give some people some closure. Some of these women, some of these girls, or some of these children will have husbands and children and grandchildren that don't know a thing about their past. They'll have kept this a secret their whole life and maintained this new normal, and it'll be eating away at them like cancer.
And as we said earlier, it's important to know, warts and all, where you've come from.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's important, even if that's not a step you take, but it's important to have the opportunity to do so. And now is a crucial time. So the point of me talking about stuff like this is to raise the conversation here, because this doesn't happen to other people. This happens to people. There's no other people. It's you and it's me. And
we are those people.
20 years ago, this didn't happen to me, but now I'm very much part of this conversation. And so for those 12,000, almost 12,000 Irish people out there, if there's anybody that's come through this system, this legislative policy, to listen to your story, to hear it, and for you to have your say, and for you to record your experience, because whether you like it or not, it is part of the country's history. And this country as well, England's history.
Yes, absolutely.
For a third of that time, certainly for the mother and baby homes in Northern Ireland, for a third of that time, it was under direct rule from Whitehall. So we've all got, this history going from blame going in every direction. It's not one thing or the other. But there's systems in place. There's well-established and well-funded systems of counselling services and advice, and you can be kept in the loop about what's going on with it, and talk to other people that know exactly your pain. And while, Mum's experience isn't unique, it isn't universal either, and there's variations on it. she's probably certainly one of the younger ones that went into one of these organisations. But when I look at her story, I look at her story of, from the age of 25, I've looked at her as a totally different person. She will get up in the morning and she'll have her own time, and she will sit there staring with eyes like saucers, and you just think, what on earth is she thinking about? And you just know, when you know what you know that she's reliving every single minute of that, questioning every single aspect. What's happened to a daughter? What's that like? What would this be like? Or dreaming of an entirely different future. And that's an impact. That's, we're 60 years now this month, from when that abuse first started. So, yeah, it's a long time coming. So 60 years for a woman born in 1956, only 15 years older than me. It's a long time to have something eating away at you.
It is.
And it's taken the very, very core of her. But she is a tough cookie, and there's people refer to them as victims. I think she would probably say victim my arse. She's
survivor.
Survivor
is the good word, isn't it?
Yeah,
but it's her time to have her story heard, and as you said about the number of people in Essex, if anyone listening is affected by what you've talked about, or it resonates with them and they'd like to reach out for some support, then we're very happy to offer that and signpost and
I can give
refer
all of the numbers for the Northern Ireland organisations.
Absolutely. So if anyone would like to get in touch with us, please do, and we'll be happy to facilitate that. Jeff, it's been great talking to you today. Thank you.
Thank you.
We always end by asking our guests what would be the title of your life story, and I've heard some of this before and it's always fascinating to me, but I think you gave a really good title of your life story when you were talking, when you said Onwards Together, which I think is just lovely because it's finally what you and your mum are entitled to do.
Yeah.
But have you got a better one?
Tomorrow's another day. Who can resist? Who can resist a bit of Gone with the Wind? Who can resist? Yeah, tomorrow's another day.
Maybe we'll have two headers for this one.
Onwards
What do you
Together.
think?
Yeah, Onwards Together sounds a little bit Salvation Army, I have to say.
Oh, okay, fair enough. You win. You are the valued podcastee.
Okay.
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
and thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you.